The incident that would eventually cause the galactic culinary ban of humanity began innocently enough, in a hangar bay on the Rylithar-class battlecruiser Zaraphan, docked in orbit over the trade moon of Lenthais V. The ship, a marvel of engineering with armor plating that could withstand solar flares and weaponry that could vaporize asteroids, was parked next to a diplomatic shuttle while its crew attended a trade summit. What no one expected was that a single stew would bring the entire vessel to its knees. Orion Ashford had never been a particularly skilled cook, but he'd always been curious. After 2 years stationed in the intergalactic human exchange program, curiosity had evolved into obsession. The ship he was assigned to, the Zaraphan, didn't have a kitchen. Food was synthesized from nutrient cartridges and extruded in blocks. To Orion, who grew up in a small town in northern Montana where his grandmother made everything from scratch, it was a daily insult to the senses. He had spent months collecting ingredients from across the quadrant: dried Vilox root from Thessari Prime, Kelman oil from the Yervin Reefs, and a chunk of aged Terran cheddar smuggled from Earth. All he needed now was heat. "Orion, I still don't understand why you won't just eat the synth rations," said Commander Dralix, a towering blue-skinned Yavathi who had the unfortunate duty of overseeing human affairs on board. "Because they taste like regret and compressed wallpaper," Orion replied, hunched over a heavy steel pot he'd managed to weld together from spare engine casings. He had set up the makeshift cooking station in the auxiliary maintenance bay. Far from the main reactor, he wasn't a complete idiot. Dralix's nostrils flared an involuntary Yavathi sign of suspicion. "You're aware this area is designated for inert equipment storage." Orion wiped his hands on a towel. "Exactly. Nothing here explodes." Dralix gave a low hum, which for a Yavathi was the equivalent of a sigh, and walked off muttering about filing incident reports. For the next hour, Orion worked in blissful peace. He chopped, stirred, and adjusted the flame on his portable plasma torch with the care of a neurosurgeon. The scent that began to waft through the bay was something not even the ship's biosensors could identify. That should have been the first warning. A technician named Fryn passed by, paused, sniffed, and collapsed. Orion ran over and checked his vitals. "He's fine." "Just overwhelmed," he muttered, dragging the unconscious alien to a safe corner before returning to his pot. The stew was nearly done. He added the final ingredient: a splash of Earth whiskey aged for 30 years and sealed in a carbon-neutral bottle. As soon as the alcohol hit the heat, a low rumble echoed through the bay. Orion stepped back. On the bridge, alarms screamed. "Energy surge detected in Maintenance Bay 7, barked Ensign Verley, eyes scanning the console in disbelief. "Source?" asked Captain Helvier. "It's cooking," Verley said. Helvier blinked. "As in food?" "Yes, Captain, human cuisine." "Seal the bay." Too late. The pot, now chemically bonded with the exotic minerals from the ingredients, had begun to undergo a fusion reaction. Not a massive one, just enough to melt through the bay floor, carve a neat hole through 3 decks, and destabilize the primary coolant loop in the starboard weapons array. The resulting explosion didn't destroy the ship outright, but it did melt the entire aft section into a puddle of glowing slag that drifted into space like a dying jellyfish. Orion survived. Barely. He was ejected from the bay by the force of the explosion, and found floating in a damaged escape pod 12 hours later, unconscious, covered in second-degree burns and holding a ladle. He woke in the medical bay with tubes in his arms, pain in his chest, and a very angry Captain Helvier standing over him. "I need to know what you were making," Helvier said. Orion blinked. "Just stew." "What kind of stew melts a battlecruiser?" Orion coughed. "A really good one." The Galactic Tribunal convened 3 weeks later. Orion had recovered enough to walk with a cane and had undergone multiple skin grafts. He was not charged with terrorism, but only because the Yavathi engineers confirmed that no known weapon could have caused the kind of chemical reaction his stew had produced. Dralix testified with a faint tremble in his voice. "I smelled it, Your Honors. It was beautiful, but it wasn't food. It was alchemy." The tribunal reviewed scans, chemical breakdowns, and sensor logs. They called in specialists from the Culinary Institute of Jupiter and a physicist from the Tarson Nebula who theorized that the combination of Vilox root and Terran cheddar created a subatomic resonance with the ship's alloy. No alien had ever considered that cooking could be a vector for destructive energy. Until now, a ban was proposed, not on humans but on humans cooking. The difference was legal but absolute. Orion was asked to speak at the final hearing. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone," he said, leaning on his cane. "I just wanted to make something real, something that reminded me of home." "You succeeded," Judge Veltra said. "Too well." The ban passed unanimously. Orion was returned to Earth with honors and a lifetime probation from using open flames on any galactic vessel. But the story didn't end there. 6 months later, on the diplomatic station Rethax 9, a minor culinary incident involving a human diplomat named Rosalind Harper and a toaster oven resulted in the evacuation of 3 decks. Investigators found traces of the same Vilox root in the crust of a handmade tart. Rosalind was detained and questioned. "I was just baking," she said. "Do you know Orion Ashford?" asked the lead investigator. "No," she replied, "but I read his blog." The tribunal reconvened. New restrictions were added. Not just cooking, but any form of human food preparation involving heat, fermentation, or pressurization was now illegal in galactic space. Only prepackaged Earth-certified meals were permitted, and even those underwent rigorous scanning. Back on Earth, Orion had taken a job as a culinary safety consultant. He spent his days teaching classes on thermochemical awareness and proper galley design. One afternoon, he was visited by a young boy named Soren, about 10 years old, whose parents had survived the Zarafin incident. "Are you the guy who melted the ship?" Soren asked. Orion nodded. "That was me. Can you teach me?" Orion paused. "Why would you want to learn something you're not allowed to do? Because you made something so powerful it scared the galaxy." Orion smiled faintly and reached for a notebook. "All right. But we start with safety goggles." And somewhere, in the shadows of the Galactic Council's archives, the words remained etched in steel. "No human shall apply heat to organic matter within galactic jurisdiction, but in kitchens on Earth, behind sealed doors and reinforced walls, the spirit of human cooking burned on." The surgical adhesive peeled with a sound like tearing paper. Orion hissed as the nurse applied a fresh layer to his ribs. "Try not to breathe too deep," she said, adjusting the pressure band around his torso. "The grafts are holding, but your intercostals are still weak." "I'm trying," he muttered, "but my lungs keep insisting on oxygen." The nurse, a pale-skinned Glenary with translucent arms and a face shaped like a spoon, didn't laugh. Glenary weren't known for their humor. She replaced the instruments in a tray without a word and left him sitting alone on the hospital cot, back stiff, legs dangling over the edge, outside the clinic window. Earth's moon hung low and heavy, drifting behind a curtain of clouds like it was ashamed to be watching. There was a knock at the doorframe. Orion didn't look up. "Unless you brought pie, I'm not interested," he said. "I brought a letter," replied a voice with the texture of wet gravel. He turned. Standing in the doorway was a Barthel diplomat, nearly 7 feet tall, with a face like a cracked stone and eyes that blinked vertically. "Ambassador Kress," Orion said, "didn't expect you to show up in person. Your situation has complicated our internal protocols. Let me guess, someone tried to make a sandwich and disabled a planetary weather grid." Kress stepped inside, careful not to brush the ceiling with his horns. "No, but we intercepted a transmission from a human agricultural colony near Dirac Belt. They were attempting to distill fermented root extract using solar reflectors." Orion blinked. "You mean moonshine?" Kress nodded. "It ignited the upper atmosphere. Rain has not stopped in 4 standard days." He handed Orion a data wafer. "The tribunal wants you to consult." "I'm not cleared for travel," Orion said, gesturing to his side, "or stares or sudden laughter. They're sending a medical ship. You'll be monitored. You don't have to cook, just observe." Orion stared at the wafer in his hand. "You realize I'm officially forbidden from culinary activity." "Correct. which is why we require your expertise to prevent further improvisation. He rubbed his chin. And if I say no, Kress tilted his head, then I must remain here until you reconsider. It wasn't a threat, it was worse. Barthel diplomats had no sense of personal space and a complex system of bodily humidity that made close proximity deeply unpleasant. Fine, Orion said, sliding off the cot. But I'm bringing my own gloves this time. 3 days later, he stood at the edge of a flooded field on the colony world of Leto 4, wearing a weatherproof exosuit and glaring at a half-submerged distillation rig made from repurposed satellite dishes and old mining tubing. The rain hadn't let up. A young woman in a soaked poncho approached, shielding her eyes from the downpour. You the guy who melted the ship, he grimaced. Is that going to be my new title? Depends. You here to shut us down? Depends, he echoed. You the one who thought it was smart to aim a concave reflector at a vat of flammable organics, she shrugged. We were cold. He walked around the rig, boots sinking into mud that smelled faintly of sugar and regret. The setup was absurd but functional. A series of copper coils looped through a cooling trench dug into the soil, leading to a condensation chamber that had once been a weather buoy. You ran this at full solar convergence. We used mirrors, she said. It only exploded once. He turned to Kress, who stood under a vibrating umbrella that hummed at a frequency just below hearing. This is what you called me for. There are 12 colonies attempting similar setups, Kress said. If their methods are even half as unstable as this, we face a statistical certainty of planetary incidence within the cycle. Orion crouched beside the main tube and opened a panel. Steam hissed out. He flinched and slipped, landing hard on his tailbone with a grunt. I'm adding spinal bruising to my invoice, he said. We use pain as currency where I'm from, Kress replied. He stood, wiping his gloves on his sleeves. Look, this isn't malicious, it's survival. They're not trying to cook gourmet meals, they're trying to stay warm, stay fed. You banned everything except sealed rations, but those don't grow. People adapt. Kress's eyes shifted hue, a Barthel sign of internal conflict. Then you must help us create boundaries they will respect, not just laws, alternatives. Orion looked at the rig again. You want me to design galactically compliant cooking equipment? Yes, Kress said, but it must not resemble cooking. He rubbed his temples. You want me to build a machine that isn't a stove, doesn't look like a stove, but still functions like one? Correct. Fine. I'll need a workshop, isolation protocols, and no interference from regulatory inspectors. Agreed. And I want real coffee, Kress hesitated. We'll allow a synthetic analog infused with molecular caffeine. Close enough. They set up a temporary lab within an unused cargo hangar on the colony's edge. Orion worked in isolation. No open flames, no organic ingredients, just diagrams, simulations, and trial runs using inert substitutes. He wore a full hazard suit and kept a fire suppressant canister within reach at all times. The first prototype exploded. Not violently, just with enough force to knock the safety drone off its perch and fill the hangar with a fine mist of burnt plastic. Too much internal pressure, Orion muttered, adjusting the intake valves. The second model overheated and melted the alloy housing. Right. Heat dispersion grid needs to be external. On the third attempt, he got it to lightly toast a synthetic bread proxy without triggering any alarms. Kress watched through a reinforced window. It appears stable. Orion peeled off his gloves. It's ugly, it vibrates when you turn it on, and it smells like ozone, but it makes food. Will others be able to replicate it? Only if they follow the schematics. Deviate and the entire thing shuts down, Kress tilted his head. You've built a machine that punishes improvisation. Exactly, no more stew meltdowns, no more atmospheric ignition, just bland, safe sustenance. Will humans accept it? Orion looked tired. They'll hate it. But they'll use it. A week later, the first shipment of units was dispatched to the 12 at-risk colonies. Within days, reports filtered in. No explosions, no injuries, some complaints about the taste, but no structural damage. The tribunal authorized a broader rollout. Orion returned to Earth under escort. His ribs still ached in the cold. As he stepped off the transport, a small crowd waited. A woman held up a sign that read, Thanks for not blowing us up. He gave a half wave and headed straight for the medical clinic. The same culinary nurse met him at the door. Back so soon. I missed your cheerful disposition, he said, limping past her. She handed him a data pad. Your vitals are consistent. But you've gained 3 kilograms, probably all the synthetic bread proxy. As he changed into a hospital gown, he noticed something new on the wall, a small, flat panel with a single button. What's that? He asked. The nurse blinked, then followed his gaze. New policy. Emergency suppression system. In case any patient tries to cook. He stared at it for a moment. I didn't even bring a spoon. She raised one translucent eyebrow. You don't need one. You have a reputation. 3 weeks after the colony rollout, Orion found himself inside a thermal isolation chamber on Earth's Polar Research Annex, surrounded by frost-rimed walls and a single, humming prototype unit he absolutely hated. He crouched, arms crossed tight beneath a silver insulation wrap, watching the machine vibrate its way through another cycle. It was the 39th test in 4 days. They all worked. That wasn't the problem. A low chime sounded. The hatch opened automatically, revealing a tray of steaming nutrient slabs shaped like triangles. They looked edible. Technically. He pulled one free with tongs and took a bite. It tasted like laundry. Behind a triple-sealed glass panel, research supervisor Alex tapped a stylus against the glass. Orion turned his head without standing. I'm not making another one. Alex's voice came through a filtered speaker, tonal and deliberate. The replication matrix is functioning within safe margins. We need confirmatory feedback on palatability indices. I just told you it tastes like someone boiled a sock. That is not a standardized expression. It should be. Alex adjusted something on his data pad. His upper torso extended slightly, a trait of his species whenever they attempted persuasion. The Intergalactic Nutrition Consortium expects a full flavor profile assessment by end of day. They'll get one when someone invents a flavor. He tossed the half-eaten triangle back onto the tray. It slid off and hit the floor with a soft thud. I need to speak to someone who's actually eaten food before, he muttered. Alex stared silently for a moment, then tapped a command. The chamber door hissed open. Your vitals remain within acceptable parameters. You may leave, he said. Orion exited the cold room, joints stiff from hours of stillness. A med drone hovered nearby, scanning him in rhythmic pulses. It beeped twice and retreated. In the corridor, a small group of trainees passed, whispering behind their masks. One trailed a moment longer, then jogged to catch up with the others. He didn't bother looking. At the end of the hallway, a service lift opened to reveal a familiar figure. Cress stepped out, horn casing polished, posture unusually rigid. I was told you refused the taste panel, he said. I'm not here to give reviews on reconstituted drywall. You designed the unit. I designed a heat-safe food synthesizer. I didn't promise it would taste like anything. Cress walked beside him as they headed for the observation lounge. The colonies report stable operation, no incidents. But morale is declining. There have been unauthorized modifications. Orion stopped. Already. One of the miners on Talendra 3 modified the chamber to accept open source code. He attempted to caramelize a protein wedge. Orion rubbed his eyes. How bad? The chamber vented into low orbit. The resulting vapor trail disrupted satellite alignment over the equatorial belt. They entered the lounge. A few chairs, a table, a filtered view of the Arctic horizon. Orion collapsed into the nearest seat and pulled a thermal blanket over his lap. Cress remained standing. I knew they'd start tweaking, Orion said. You can't ask humans to follow instructions forever. You were once one of them. I still am. You wear a thermal wrap indoors and refuse to eat your own invention. Because I remember what real food is supposed to feel like. Cress considered that. His head tilted slightly, the way Barthel's did when filing thoughts into long-term memory. We have a problem, he said. The tribunal is convening to discuss escalation. To what? Full prohibition of prepared human sustenance in all galactic territories. Including planetary colonies. Orion sat up. That would cut off entire settlements. They'd have to rely on imports or move underground. Then we must provide a final solution, one that cannot be altered, bypassed, or misunderstood. I already gave you that. No, you gave us a mechanism. We need a culture, he blinked. You want me to invent a food religion. I want you to make compliance desirable. Orion stood and walked to the window. Frost laced the edges. He pressed his palm to the glass, letting the cold bite through the synthetic fabric. I need one volunteer, he said. For what? A taste test. Real ingredients, controlled conditions. We follow every protocol, every fail-safe. If it works, we create a model they can believe in. Kress hesitated. The ban has exceptions for educational demonstration under neutral jurisdiction, if witnessed by a tribunal observer and isolated from external systems. Kress blinked. That's obscure. I read the fine print after the stew thing. 2 days later, they boarded a secure medical vessel bound for the demilitarized moon of Vensar Delta, a neutral zone used for biohazard simulations. The facility had a chamber rated for Class A chemical reactions and a ceiling-mounted suppression grid capable of deploying cryofoam in under 2 seconds. Orion entered with a sealed crate marked fragile, biocombustible, and a handheld scanner. The volunteer arrived separately, escorted by 2 guards and carrying a signed waiver. She was a Xyrathi diplomat named Pella, known for her iron stomach and absolute lack of smell receptors. He set up the station under 3 cameras and a redundant sensor grid. The crate hissed as he opened it, revealing a small pouch of dehydrated mushrooms, a packet of ground maize, a vial of oil, and a single dried pepper. I'm making soup, he said. Pella nodded. I do not understand soup. You will. The preparation was slow. Every movement logged by the oversight drone. Temperature spikes resulted in audible warnings. The flame wasn't real, it was a radiant coil fed through a carbon lattice, but it warmed the pot evenly. He stirred in silence. No shortcuts, no improvisation. After 20 minutes, the scent began to rise. Nothing extreme, just a faint, earthy warmth. Pella lifted the sample to her mouth. Her tongue flicked out a Xyrathi trait resembling a hummingbird in motion, and she paused. Then she swallowed. Orion waited. Well, it is complex. That's it. There are layers, some I cannot name. But it is not unpleasant. The tribunal observer leaned forward. Did you experience any physiological distress? No, my digestion has begun. Any sense of combustion, internal or external? No, Kress, watching from behind a protective barrier, exhaled. The observer turned to Orion. You have demonstrated a controllable preparation method. We will allow this model to be codified. I'll write the handbook, he said. No, you will submit it to a regulatory author. Orion nodded. Fair. A week later, the document titled Thermal Preparation Protocol for Human Origin Meals was uploaded to the Galactic database. It included diagrams, ingredient limits, and a strict list of acceptable flame simulations. No open fire, no pressure seals, no fermentation above body temperature. Every colony received the update. The machines were modified. A new interface appeared. Recipe. Orion Standard Soup. It became the first officially sanctioned human dish in galactic history. 3 months afterward, the tribunal lifted the temporary restriction on human cooking, replacing it with the Orion Clause. Humans may prepare meals only through approved devices under regulated conditions. In the Polar Research Annex, Orion sat by the lounge window, this time with a real bowl of soup. Not hot enough to melt anything. Not bland enough to cause despair. Kress entered, holding a datapad. Colonies report stable morale, no incidents. One request for dessert protocol. Orion smiled faintly. Let's not push our luck. Kress sat across from him. You could have walked away, retired. I thought about it. Why didn't you? Orion stirred the soup. Because someone had to prove we could feed ourselves without breaking the galaxy. Outside, snow fell gently. No sirens. No alarms, just steam rising from a bowl and a man who finally got to eat.